Hello, boys and girls. Lord Hawkeye here again. This time it's not politics. I wanted to talk about an actual in-game debate going on these days that I just wanted to weigh in on. So you can listen to me ramble as I slowly drive myself insane trying to do the guild fishing achievement pretty much single-handedly. Yes, you heard that correctly. Yes, I'm crazy. Anyways, I want to talk about this whole casual versus hardcore debate that's been really got heated up during the Lich King event, and it's still going on these days. For those of you not familiar, I'll try to sum this up as best I can. When this game first started out, raiding, that is doing the big dungeons like 25 men, although back then it was 40, it was pretty much reserved only for the really hardcore dedicated to this game, like people who spent hours and hours at it. For the casual player, raids just demanded way too much time, so it was pretty much out of reach material to them. And that continued to be the case in the next expansion known as Burning Crusade. In some ways it was even more so. In fact, the last raid that appeared in that expansion, the Sunwell, it was found that only 5% of the player base had ever actually ran that raid. Everyone else never even got a chance at it because it was just way too much demands of your time to get in there. Some people just didn't have it. So, Blizzard, of course, looked at this and realized, why the heck are we going to all this trouble designing content for only 5% of our customers? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? So when the next expansion came along, Wrath of the Lich King, they decided that they should make raids more accessible to the more casual crowd. So they made it a lot easier to get into raids, and they made it so that previous content would get easier to get into as they introduced new stuff. So if you came in late, it'd be easier to catch up, and if raiding was still out of your reach, you could still just wait till it got toned down, and then you could still do it. That's basically how it went. Now this, of course, promoted all sorts of screaming and yelling, and apocalyptic proclamations from the hardcore crowd, saying they made the game too easy, they're ruining the game, and all the other stuff you'd come to expect. And this still goes on today in some ways in this expansion. This expansion made things a little harder dungeon-wise, but not overly so. Like they brought back crowd control and a bunch of other things, but they still wanted to make it accessible to the casual crowd so that they weren't alienating a big chunk of their customer base, because as we all know, that doesn't make a whole lot of business sense to do that. Yeah, so first of all, contrary to what people say, good business is not selling out. So, I'm sorry, but Blizzard is not a charity organization, boys and girls, so don't expect that from them. Anyways, so that's the story as well as I can tell it. So, I wanted to weigh in on this. Okay, I might be biased on this, being a protection warrior who got royally dumped on in Burning Crusade, the expansion that the hardcores like to praise as the best of times. Okay, I'll be honest with you. My opinion of Burning Crusade is really tainted by some really bad experiences I had in it. They wanted paladins to be tanks, and in doing so, they made them way overpowered, and I ended up feeling like the red-headed stepchild of tanking. Hey? Many runs were met with whining of, I don't want a warrior tank, I want a paladin. Yeah, me bitter? Nah, I don't know what you're talking about. Anyways, enough about that. So they said that Burning Crusade was more challenging. I find that a little bit iffy, to be honest. Like, they say dungeons were harder. I say actually dungeons were a lot more full of padding in Burning Crusade than being harder. Like, in fact, that was one of the problems I had with Burning Crusade, in that the non-boss fights were actually harder than the boss fights. The boss fights were total jokes compared to the trash fights, which I think was a bit. A lot of the trash fights weren't merely hard; they were just downright cheap. Like, does anyone remember the room where you fought Blackheart the Insider? There's like 10 groups you had to pull, there was 2 patrols, and there's these rogues that would randomly show up and kill your healer instantly. You couldn't do anything about it. And to that I say, that's not challenge. That's cheap shots and it's padding. It's just making the whole run take longer than it should. Like in Shadow Labyrinth, that place was in. I used to call that dungeon the dungeon you will never finish because people always ditched because the damn place just took so freaking long. Anyways, so already I question the claim that Burning Crusade was more challenging because in some ways it wasn't. It over-relied on cheap shots and things like that. You know, crushing blows, I remember that. That sucked. I'm glad they got rid of that. Anyways, so when Wrath of the Lich King came along, first came Naxxramas. Now, I rated in vanilla, but I never got to do new Naxxramas back then because of scheduling issues. So I never got to see the place. So I was actually quite delighted to see that they were bringing it back. Yeah, we were bringing it back as an easier raid. It was kind of like an intro to raiding sort of deal, which I thought was not a bad idea. A lot of people get intimidated by raiding, so why not start them off with something a little easier? And Naxxramas was good for nostalgia value, so I thought it was all a great idea. Well, apparently the hardcore crowd didn't think so. They said they ruined it. They said it was a complete face roll. To that I say, no, it wasn't. You still died if you didn't do the boss fights correctly. So I really don't know what they're going on about that. I think they're just it just comes off sounding like they're treating Naxxramas like some kind of holy ground that shouldn't be touched. And to that I say, kindly get over yourself, lads. It's a game. Anyways, so I didn't mind Naxxramas. When they brought out Ulduar, I did absolutely love that. Like, that was just easily one of my favorite raids ever. Yogg-Saron was just an amazing fight. I can't stress enough how much I love that fight. And what I do agree with them on is that Trial of the Crusader, which was a raid dungeon that had no trash fights, you just fought bosses back to back on it. And so it was really easy, really quick to get through that. I think, if anything, it was ill-timed. Coming right after Ulduar, Ulduar really didn't get a chance to get played out as much as it should have. And then Trial of the Crusader came along, and there was no reason to run Ulduar, so I didn't get to do Ulduar as much as I wanted to, which I think was disappointing. I think Trial of the Crusader should have come before, or should have come way longer after than it did, if anything. And Icecrown Citadel, that was perfectly fair. I didn't have a problem with that. It was an interesting place, and we got to fight the Lich King, which we'd been waiting to do for like 6 years, so that was all awesome. So everyone likes to use the term Wrath babies as people who got used to Wrath and became terrible players as a result. Well, to that I have to clear things up for you guys. Guys, Wrath of the Lich King did not turn anybody into bad players. They were already bad players, and they were bad players back in Burning Crusade. They were bad players back in Vanilla. It's just bad people who don't learn are people who don't learn. No gameplay is going to ever change that. I mean, even Total Biscuit said that he got worse because of Wrath of the Lich King. And I say, that's because you slacked off. Don't blame the game for that. That's just being childish. Yeah, sorry, Total Biscuit, but I can't agree with you on this. Now, the thing I really find suspect is that, like I've always said, people talk shit a lot. Look at what people do. That's what really tells you what That's what really tells you what they really believe. These people who complain that the problem with the Lich King was lack of challenge, I have looked at some of these people's profiles. Over half of them never did hard mode content. Only a tiny fraction of them ever killed Yogg-Saron on hard mode, which was one of the hardest challenges in the Wrath of the Lich King. So I'm thinking, well, you're complaining about challenge, but you're not doing the challenges laid out for you. What's the deal? It's like someone playing a game on easy mode and complaining the game's too easy. Any reasonable person's going to look and say, well, why don't you just change the difficulty setting that's right there in front of you as plain as day? So obviously, merely challenge isn't their problem. Or some argue that dungeons were total face rolls. I ran to that answer. Well, yeah, they were when you overgeared them. When we first got into them, they sure as hell weren't. I died a lot of them. And yes, they are. I do think it's an improvement now. But to say that Burning Crusade was the best, no, absolutely not. The challenge was artificial and it was not fun. A lot of times it was frustrating. It felt like a job. In this one, they got the challenge right. They're harder, but not at the expense of fun, which is the nice balance to reach. It's a bit difficult. Anyways, so the real cause behind the hardcore is ire. It's not challenge. It definitely isn't. Because even if you did do all the hard modes, master them all, and still wanted more, that's easy to do. Like that one guild who fought Lord Marogar in all blues. That was really hard to do, and they pulled it off. This is what people who seek challenges will do. Or like that Ragwin, that Death Knight who likes to solo raid bosses. Yeah, if you want challenge, go do stuff like what he does. It's not difficult. It's not complicated. So if it's not just merely lack of challenge that's their problem, what is it? Well, I have my own theory. The hardcores aren't going to like it, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think the thing was, they got an ego boost out of seeing content that the more casual people didn't get to do. That was their big thing. They loved saying, "Oh, we've seen the raids and you guys haven't because you're just casuals." Ha 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 ha. And that was the case in Burning Crusade as well, which of course they still loved. Like if you were the biggest badass in the game if you ran the Sunwell, and if you beat it, you were just legendary. Everyone looked up to you. Well, in Wrath of the Lich King, all that changed. In Wrath of the Lich King, pretty much everyone had seen at least some raid content. So it wasn't something special everywhere. It was something everyone got to enjoy. And personally, as someone who has raided since vanilla, I don't see a problem with it. I say they pay their fee, they should get to see the content eventually. Now yes, those willing to put the most effort into it, they're going to get to see it first, and that's perfectly fair. But I really do not see the merit in saying that this content is hardcore only. If you're a casual, you're just plain not allowed to see it. I think that's arrogant, I think that's elitist, yeah, I'm going to throw out that word, and I think it reflects very bad on the raiding community personally. I think a much more mature attitude is what we need to adopt here. Otherwise, you're going to realize that the casuals never really respected you all that much. They really quite thought you were dicks like in that way. So to all the people whining about challenge, it's not about challenge. It's that you liked having content that you could hog to yourself, and now that that's not the case, you're now acting like kids who now have to share. And seriously, stop with this. People who don't raid shouldn't get epics nonsense. We were crafting epics since vanilla, so stop with that. That's just silly. Because that's the thing when people say that you get points in dungeons, you can trade them in for epics, and that's gear beneath their station. Oh, give me a break. It's insanely slow to get gear that way. Nobody would ever practically go that way instead of raiding. So, and it helps people break into raiding, so you don't get stuck in that can't get raiding because you don't have the gear, and can't get gear because you don't raid nonsense. I do it myself. I find it's a nice way to gear up and prep for raiding. Right now, I'm not raiding these days because I wanted to take a break from it. I'll get into it again eventually. But yeah, this whole purple should be raiding only is just silly. We've had access to purples outside of raiding since vanilla. I really don't see them. I don't see the logic in that. Ugh. Still many fish to go. Anyways, so I just wanted to weigh in on that debate. That I think the hardcore crowd are being unreasonable and really being quite childish about this. As a raider myself, I take quite offense at being compared to these people, because it is elitism. You can say it's an overused term all you want. It is completely true. It's saying that you should have access to content that no one else has just to feed your ego. And I think, seriously, if you get your ego trips from this game, you really need to get out more. That's my thing. So yeah, as much as I love Total Biscuit's videos, I really think he's 100% wrong on this. If casuals are getting a few epic pieces, what the hell do I care? It doesn't affect me one bit. Makes my gear less special? Oh, stuff it. That's just silly. I have no idea what kind of logic they're using to get that. I think it's a case of sunk cost fallacy. Anyways, I'm done rambling. That's my take on this little debate. I'll get back into politics next time. But until then, be aware and be wise.